and welcome to the Scouse Science Podcast. My name is Tom Solomon. I'm at the University of Liverpool, where I'm Professor of Neurology and Director of the UK's Emerging Infections Research Unit. Now, our guests today are Emily Adams and Andy Burnham. Would you guys both like to turn your cameras on and unmute yourselves and say hello? Good
afternoon.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, Tom, I can't turn my camera on. It says
Don't worry, I'm going to help you. I'm going to talk you through it. Andy, for those who are listening, you won't be surprised to know that Andy did not quite make the briefing meeting earlier on and has just joined us literally seconds ago. So bear with whilst we try and help Andy with the video. So Andy, what sort of device are you on?
I'm just on a PC, a laptop, Tom.
Okay. And if you go down to the bottom left corner, there should be something that says start video.
There we go. There we go.
Brilliant.
Oh, easy.
Okay.
Easy.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. Before we chat, let me just give a little bit of housekeeping to everybody. First of all, many people have joined us via Zoom, and on Zoom you can send in your questions via the chat function. So you'll be able to do that. Many people, we have hundreds joining on Zoom and we have thousands on Facebook. It's the University of Liverpool live Facebook stream. So again, you can post your questions or comments onto Facebook and we'll pick those up. And also you can send tweets. My Twitter thing is @RunningMadProf. Emily's is Dr. E.R. Adams 1. And Andy, what's yours? We have seen you tweeting earlier.
Yeah, it's at Andy Burnham GM.
That's it. That's great. So please do tweet away, those who want to tweet away. Now, on the chat function, we always give people something to do to check your chat function's working. So please, on the chat, send a message to tell us where you're listening from. Tell us if it's your first time. And then also, we thought it might be fun to do some kind of poll. So I was trying to think what poll we could do. And don't worry, I'm not doing anything UK political. Why don't you poll and tell us whether you're Trump or Biden? So send those messages in, Trump or Biden. I can see these messages coming through. Aisha from Rossendale, first timer Melanie from Liverpool. Good, it's working. And we have a vote for Biden, more Bidens. Anyway, keep them coming in. And thanks so much for joining us. This is our 5th Scouse Science podcast. If you missed any of the earlier ones, you can catch up with them in various ways. You can go to wherever you usually get your podcasts from, and you will see them there. Or you can go to the Facebook page called Scouse Science Poddy, and you'll see things there. I've posted those, but I'll post them again a bit later. Good. That's all the housekeeping, I think. So why do we do this Scouse Science podcast? Well, firstly, it seems to be fun. Secondly, as a scientist, I spend quite a lot of time talking to the media. I know Emily does too. And it's always a bit rushed and we never really have the chance for a proper chat. So we thought we would have a bit more of a chat. And then we also thought that we would include somebody who's not a scientist to make sure that we use the English language and keep things simple. And it also does allow us to get think about the wider impact of this pandemic and keep it grounded. So today's guests, as you know, are Andy Burnham and Emily Adams. Welcome, both of you. First of all, Andy, how's your day been? And I think you came from a COVID meeting, didn't you?
I did. And sorry that I missed the briefing session, but it's been, it's challenging because obviously we're digesting the weekend's announcements and what it means for Greater Manchester. We've been looking at the Liverpool mass testing scheme this morning because obviously it's possible it might come in our direction as well. So been a busy morning, Tom. Yeah.
Busy morning. Okay. And I normally introduce the guests. I mean, I think most people probably will know who you are, Andy, but just in case they don't, or they don't know your background, I was interested. I hadn't realized until I read the authoritative background on Wikipedia, which is probably only half true. But I hadn't realized you went straight from being an undergraduate at Cambridge into politics, more or less. You never had a proper job.
I did briefly have a proper job for a couple of years. You're nearly right.
What was it?
I was a journalist for about 3 years. So,
You were okay. All right. Well, like I say, don't believe everything you read on Wikipedia.
If journalist is a proper job, I suppose.
No, I think it is. I think it is. Actually, probably being a politician is some kind of proper job. You were health secretary. You've had many political posts, but health secretary under Gordon Brown, and that's something maybe we'll come back to. You were second in the leadership election of 2015 for the Labour Party.
That's a kind way of putting it. Lost is another way.
No, we're very positive on this podcast. And you came second to Jeremy Corbyn. I wonder what happened to him. And then you've been Manchester Mayor since 2017. Let me now introduce Emily, who is a biologist. She did her PhD at Bristol University, where she studied trypanosomiasis, sleeping sickness, and then spent time in Africa working on diagnostic tests there. She then spent time at Amsterdam at the Royal Tropical Institute and came to Liverpool to the School of Tropical Medicine in 2013, where she's the diagnostic lead for the Centre for Drugs and Diagnostics. Have I got that right, Emily?
That's off
the Tropical School website, so hopefully that should be accurate. And there were a couple of things I wanted to pick up on questions I'd asked you about. You did your undergraduate at Imperial College London.
I did.
And then gradually migrated north. Great. Okay. Well, why don't we? I mean, gosh, there are so many things one could talk about. I suppose what I did want to ask you, Andy, was, how are you?
Pretty well, Tom. I've had a busy few weeks with one thing and another. A few stressful sort of moments, if you like.
I know. So we met on Question Time back in March, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When we went down to Western Supermare, I think it was, at the start of all this. And, things have been pretty tough since then for all of us. But, what I wanted to ask you, I mean, I know you get asked lots of political things, but today is a bit more relaxed. And I guess, we see somebody like you right at the centre of the Manchester response and then trying to deal with the Whitehall government. And, how do you cope with it? What kind of effect does it have on you, your family, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's been, for everybody, hasn't it? It's been a really tough year. And it has been intense, really. I'm somebody who's used to dealing with the media, but I think it's been incessant. I think people have seen me in this, my impromptu television studio here, broadcasting to the nation a few times. But I think, the level of exposure, I think, has been very, very high. How do I cope with it? Like you, running, I think, is a big part of the solution. So I've been very much sort of trying to get out every day as much as I can. I just think it's a strange thing working from home, and I'm not that much of a fan of it, to be honest. I would much prefer to be doing, mixing it up at least. I think working from home, getting out of bed and getting in front of the laptop is a kind of, it takes a toll, I think, over the year. So, yeah. Has that been
it's interesting. Has that been your kind of biggest challenge in a sense? Not the enormity of the health problem, not the enormity of dealing with the politics and government, but the fact that you're having to work from home. If you were doing all of this from the office in Manchester with your team around you, that would feel a little bit easier, would it?
Yeah, because politics is very much about that sort of, in the room and seeing where people, it really is. It is it's a people business, obviously. And so when you're kind of doing it all via laptops and you haven't got those nuances in what people are saying, and it does make it more difficult. I think there's no doubt about it, Tom. So, yeah, I think the upside is when you normally are in meetings like the ones I go to, you get the pre-meeting plotting over the tea and coffee, where they're all, there's the usual things that are done in where you have in-person meetings in politics. But I think, overall, I think we're losing quite a lot, actually, by conducting serious, very difficult discussions over Zoom. I just don't think you can fully get the sort of wider emotional intelligence into the discussion that you would ordinarily get in a face-to-face meeting.
So, Emily, what about for you? You've been doing some home working? Look, I think you're not at home today.
A little bit. No, yeah, I'm in the office today. Yes. Yeah. We've been mostly coming in, and I do feel quite lucky to be able to do that. I've had my team around me, which they've been so enthusiastic, so committed to working on COVID diagnostics, to working on this response. We've had volunteers from across the school, and they really give me a lot of energy, actually. So I do feel lucky to be coming in still.
Yeah, I mean, for me as well, as I'm in the university today, but then also I work in the hospital. And so, at the start of the whole thing, when we knew there was going to be, a lockdown looked likely, I kind of thought, oh, great, I'll be stuck at home for 3 months. I can, I'll write my next book. And it's incredibly stupid of me not to actually realize, hang on, that isn't going to apply to you, because one, you're heavily involved in the research, and two, you're going to be in the hospitals as busy as ever. But to some extent, I think we've perhaps all done that kind of kidding ourselves. Certainly, I remember, Andy, when we were in Weston-super-Mare, we were kind of thinking, well, this is going to be 2 or 3 months and then it'll be over. And which reminded me a bit of what you hear about in the war. People said, oh, the war will be over by Christmas. And I wonder if even now we're still kidding ourselves. I mean, I still say, we've got a tough winter to get through, but by the middle of next year, we'll have vaccines, and a large proportion of people will have been exposed anyway. So, by next winter, everything should be okay. But what do you think?
It's the human condition, isn't it, to sort of have an optimism bias built in, because you have to, don't you? You can't just sort of countenance ongoing misery. It's a difficult thing for people to turn their minds to. Although the meeting I've just been in has been a bit like that, I'm afraid, because we were trying to take a 6-month look as to how we're going to get to the middle of next year, rather than just kind of what it's been in 2020, where we're kind of lurching from one thing to the next. And I think we were trying to take a sort of more medium-term look. The truth of the matter is, and this is where it gets difficult, is, we think that we'll be in national lockdown, but then coming back out into tier 3, or even something they call tier 3 plus, which is really hard if you're going to open up with people. That's the most likely outcome. I mean, I think I've got a minority view on this, Tom. I think others don't see it in the same way that I do. I would prefer to do a national lockdown, which was much sharper and deeper, a proper circuit break, and that, I'm afraid, would include schools. Now, no one likes the idea of closing schools, nor do I. But I think Liverpool City Region and Greater Manchester are a bit trapped now in high levels of endemic transmission, and what we kind of need, I think, to do is you've got to give some people some sense of hope that they can get more of a normal life back, i.e. we'll go through the pain of a national lockdown to win something. Whereas what's coming out from the analysis my team are giving me is it's not going to look like that, really. It's going to be the pain of a national lockdown back into further restrictions. And
who was you meeting with this morning? Was it a local meeting, your team in Manchester?
Yes, that's right. But I know Steve will be having similar discussions over there. Okay, the mass testing might be a game changer, but the difficult thing is how do you manage all of this? You don't want to be unrealistic with people, but giving people a sort of a medium-term outlook that looks pretty bleak is not great either. So it's really difficult, I think, right now. I personally think we should. We should have gone earlier, shouldn't we? But we should have done a more meaningful circuit break, I think.
And of course, if we had gone earlier, we could have included the school half terms. It could have been an extended half term.
That's right. And I personally would ask schools to close for a short period. The reason why is because they're very disrupted anyway. So it's not as if schools are fully functioning, is it? There's a lot of kids in the Northwest experiencing a lot of disruption to their education because of the outbreaks and the being sent home, and that's not an ideal situation either. I think one thing we do all agree on is we should call for suspension of the traditional exams at the end of this year, because kids in the Northwest have already spent much more time out of school than their counterparts in other parts of the country, and therefore there's no way an examination system will be fair to students in the Northwest.
I mean, you mentioned earlier that with being on Zoom, etc., you miss the kind of normal interactions that help a meeting. Do you think your discussions with government would have gone smoother if you met with them in the old-fashioned way and you could kind of be in a room and really have a proper chat with people?
Yeah, I do. I think that would have been much better. There was kind of really awkward meetings where the tech wasn't working properly, and they were on a room in Downing Street and you couldn't quite hear them properly. It doesn't help, does it? Any of that stuff. And then there was another meeting when they controlled all the buttons and we couldn't speak unless they allowed us to speak. So
that's an ideal meeting, isn't it? You know who controls who controls the buttons today? It's me. I
was taking notes. I was like, I might use that. So I think all of that has kind of not helped. Yeah, absolutely would have been better if there was more.
What do you think, Emily? What do you think? Would you go for a complete? So I mean, clearly this lockdown is less severe than the last one, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist or indeed any kind of scientist to work out that it's therefore less likely to have as much impact as the last one. And the last one, I think, took 4 to 6 weeks before the R number got below 1.
I think it's a missed opportunity, wasn't it? The half-term break, where we could have had a really serious short 2 weeks lockdown, schools shut, and at a national scale. And I think that's a real shame. Now, would I close schools? It's really difficult. I feel really sorry for children. I'm mother of a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. We've just my 4-year-old's just had 3 weeks off school because we're just in COVID recovery. It's difficult to have them at home and to work. I think, working at home is one thing, and working at home with a 2-year-old is quite another. And so I'm really grateful. And I think nurseries especially would struggle. I don't think they'd be able to survive a lockdown where nurseries were shut. Should primary schools remain open and not secondary? I don't know. I think it's a really difficult question, and there's so much involved. So at this moment, I'm not sure I would have a complete lockdown on schools, but I would think about pulling the secondary schools. And also, I think as a medium-term view, I think we should have a conversation about a series of short, sharp national lockdowns. October half term would have been perfect start. Sometime around Christmas, maybe after Christmas Day. February half term for 2 weeks. Easter, you're right. This is endemic. It's not going away, and we need to have a medium term.
I absolutely agree with that, Emily. I think we need to plan in 2021 around the school holidays to have booked in those circuit breaks, because then everyone knows where they stand, and it might be a week extra week here or there for the kids, so not so disruptive. I think we need to approach 2021 very differently to the way things have
because at the moment, a 4-week lockdown also, if I was a student, maybe I might go home, and we know that accelerates transmission, right? Having students locked in and then going back to their homes all over the country, that's going to increase transmission, not reduce. So that's my concern about this longer lockdown that's been announced. Yeah,
well, I mean, we're certainly at Liverpool University. I think other universities, they're encouraging students to stay put.
Sure.
But it's difficult. But I mean, what is clear is, longer term planning, longer term strategy is needed. And, from the end of March the summer, the virus was low. And then we had an opportunity to think about the strategy. What if? I mean, it's obviously hard because you can't predict, our rate's going to go up or is it going to stay low? Although most of us expected it to go up over the winter. So that was kind of an opportunity to make some long-term strategic plans based on what the circulation was. Andy, let me ask you. I'm slightly anxious because people told me you might leave us before the end. I can't believe you would do that. Are you going to stick with us till 2:15?
I've probably got until about 2:05, Tom. I've got a meeting with the Secretary of State, so I probably
I heard that, but I've been in touch with him, and he says I would not want to ruin the Scouse Science Podcast. He knows how important it is to the nation. Okay, well let's just move on to something else. We've got this little contest going on overseas today. They're voting today, aren't they? Yeah, results coming in overnight. Did you, when you were Secretary of State, did you meet the American president at that stage?
Not president. I met his health secretary. So I went to the White House once. I had some contact with some of his senior Obama's team, but not.
Tell us about the White House. Tell us what was the White House like? Did you nick a spoon or something?
It's kind of smaller it's a bit like Downing Street for those who've been to Downing Street. It's smaller than you think. You imagine this huge, but it's not quite as big as you think it is. But yeah, I had a little look in the Oval Office. It's pretty impressive, I've got to say. And I'm fervently hoping that the current incumbent will be turfed out of it tonight. He says he's watching the election from it, isn't he? Which is maybe a sign that he's digging in, strapping himself in.
Exactly. we normally take some questions about halfway through, and I better take some, especially if you're going to be disappearing. So I'm going to, first of all, I was looking at the poll. I mean, I'm seeing lots of Biden. There must be a trumpeter out there somewhere. Anything but Trump, Norman Biden. I mean, really, this is just pointing to the demographic of our audience. I'm sorry, it's a sad reflection that we're not really getting out there as much as we should do. I follow Trump on Twitter. Do you guys?
I don't know if I follow him. I end up seeing what he says on Twitter.
Yeah, you see, you've got to, this is the point. You've got to, otherwise you're in an echo chamber. You've got to, make sure you're picking in other points of view. Here's something from Anne about schools. If schools are closed, are you thinking of, I'll read it as it is, forcing the arm of the Education Secretary to announce their plan B for exams next year? And this should not be based on mocks alone, which may be late, and also include teacher assessment. What would your thoughts be on that, Andy, if you're not going to do exams?
Yeah, we're very much of the view that you need to go more towards assessment. Given the hoo-ha last year on A-levels, actually the centre-assessed grades worked quite well when they finally agreed to do that, didn't they? And my brother, who's a principal of a sixth form college in Preston, Cardinal Newman, he was saying to me that the idea that they were inflating everyone's grades was just not right, because they were kind of conscious that criticism would come, and they were quite rigorous actually. So I think that worked quite well. You just cannot have exams on the back of a school year where some kids may have spent, I don't know, a quarter or kind of a fifth of the year out of school. My daughter is at home with me today, a year 11. And she's out of school again because of an isolation. So it's just not going to be possible, is it, to have traditional exams? I think the Welsh government have already faced up to that. And yes, I think we are going to have to put some pressure on. So Steve Rotherham and I are meeting the Northwest principals this week of colleges and schools, secondary schools from both Liverpool City region and Greater Manchester, and we're probably going to make a joint call about that. It could be a mixture, a hybrid, Tom, I guess. It could be a basic exam that proves a basic level of competence, and then the assessment, the grading is done by assessment. I don't know. There might be two ways of doing it, but I think straightforward exams, no. I think we've got to really mobilise a campaign now to say that would be unfair to the kids who live in tier 3 areas.
Emily, what would you? Any thoughts on exams? You're involved in examining maybe at the university level. Should we just let all the kids off and not do any exams?
I think you're right about the sort of continuous assessment, and I would prefer that to exams anyway. Sort of really assessing people over a period of time about their skills and competencies, and so I'd like to move towards that sort of a framework anyway. But I think you're right. Some kids have been in and out of school with cases. And it's really difficult to assess how many, what percentage of time they've really been able to be at school. So, yeah, I think I'm glad to hear that there's something local will be initiated as a first step.
Yeah, although the challenge is, isn't it? It's local desire versus the national picture.
Yes, although, we did, Steve and I spoke out on the A-level situation, and obviously with others. I think we helped to bring about a change. I think that the issue there was clear that kids who went to bigger institutions were just very badly disadvantaged by the algorithm. So I think it's always just work on the basis of the facts of the case, and that we've done that quite a lot through this. So the 67% furlough versus the 80% furlough. If you just confront people enough times with the basic injustice, I think eventually, in the end, the right decision will be made. And I think there's a number of examples through this crisis where where we've done that and done it in the right way. Ultimately, we get the change that's needed. Yeah,
and that has been a pattern. The other thing on Wikipedia for you is that you're the King of the North. Do you like that title, or should that
not
go?
Particularly, no. It's not going to endear me to people on your side, really, is it? So I think there's always this thing, isn't it, that Manchester feels it's the sort of the capital of the north, and I'm very conscious that we don't just suit ourselves over here, and we're not trying to run everything, and so no, not particularly helpful, but there we are.
You're, of course, I mean, you're from Liverpool, now in Manchester. I'm from Manchester originally, now in Liverpool. So, there are some of us who cross the divide. What about? I wonder
which way it's easier to do it. I'm just thinking that, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Where who is more accepting of each other? I do say that, the fact that I was born where I was, and I was elected mayor, the first ever mayor of Greater Manchester, does say something about the open-minded nature of the people of Greater Manchester.
Yeah, I found the same of the good people of Liverpool, very open and accepting. What about this role though? So clearly, there's a role that you have adopted or fallen into, like you say, of working with others to pressure the government to make changes, and that has been successful in several ways. But are you happy in that position, or would you ultimately, in the future, would you rather be in a position where you're back centrally in government again? Would you think about rejoining the party and going for future leadership?
It's not really part of my plans, if I'm honest, Tom, because I fell out of love with Westminster very much, and I think Steve the same. Both of us campaigned on various issues together, Hillsborough and other things, where you really see the kind of the full discriminatory nature of the British state in all of its sort of unfairness. And I think we just felt the Westminster world just wasn't our world ultimately. The thing about it is, and this is kind of reflection on the way politics happens in our country and perhaps why it's in such low esteem, the Westminster world makes people put party before place and before what you might think personally. By always sort of forcing you to vote in a certain way and say certain things. In the end, I think Westminster politics makes a fraud out of people because it makes them do and say things that perhaps they wouldn't do if they were left to their own devices. And in the end, that damages both them personally, but it damages the perception of politics more generally. And I think if you can just imagine a world outside of Westminster politics, because implicit in your question is that it's the only show in town and therefore it's the only thing. Do you see what I mean? And what we're trying to do.
It's the show. It's not the only show in town, but you're from the outside having to make change, convince others to make changes. If you were central, you'd be in charge. When you were central, you were in charge of the change. You were in charge of the country during the flu pandemic, weren't you?
That's true. And I think, though, that what we need to do is build a counterbalance to that Westminster system that's outside of it and is based on place first and party second, as opposed to party first and place second, which is the way Westminster works. And I think that, in the end, will rebalance if we can do it. If Steve and I can succeed and build these roles up. And
Steve is Steve Rotherham, just to let people know, your equivalent in Liverpool. Yeah,
that's right. If we can build these new structures up and establish the role, I think that will be more of a service that we could both do to British politics, if you like, or English politics, than sort of using this as a sort of bide our time and then plot our way back to Westminster at some point. So I do feel really serious about it. I don't necessarily want to go back to Westminster and everything it involves. I do think something really important needs to be done here for the country, which is to kind of take what is the most politically over-centralised country and put power closer to people in their city regions. I'll give you an example. Steve and I were on a call yesterday with Electricity Northwest and Cadent, the gas supplier. And basically, we've agreed that we're going to have a 2038 plan for a zero carbon energy grid in the Northwest. And that is much more exciting to me than doing some of the things that go on down in Westminster. We're really starting to sort of focus on the Northwest, what it needs, I get more from that than some of the nonsense that goes on down in Westminster. And sorry, it's a long answer because it is something I do think about a lot. I personally don't think I will go back to Westminster. I think the job I'm doing now will be my last job in British politics.
And in that sense, then, some of the stuff you've been doing during COVID has been, it's this Northwest focus has grown out of that. At least COVID has maybe given more power to the North in terms of changing policy than would have happened without all of this. Is that a positive we can draw from all of this?
Yeah, because I think what you've had is a very centralised response to the pandemic. And a not particularly effective one. And I think we've then become the voices of criticism to that approach and say, look, if you'd localized rather than centralized and privatized, you probably would have had a much better response to this pandemic. And I think more voices are saying that now. We've been saying it all year. And I think, because of that, then people are now thinking, well, the role has got some value because it is sort of, making a critique that has actually been proven to be true.
Certainly this centralized versus localized issue came up in terms of the diagnostics and how that happened. I mean, Emily, what are your reflections on that? You've been involved in diagnostics right from the start.
Yes, I mean, it really echoes what's happened in the testing, hasn't it? A private company heading the test and trace system, which has, not been working at all. My husband had his swab sent off to somewhere in Scotland. And 3 weeks later, he still hasn't had the result back. It's not worked out very well at all. And so today, what we heard for the Liverpool region would be a more local laboratory testing system and at mass scale, and this would be a pilot scheme for the rest of the country. And I think that there are some real advantages in working locally, but still, it is a top-down approach. The tests have been chosen by central governments. There's no data yet being released on any of them, and we know that some of the pilot schemes for one in particular have failed so far. So
this mass testing, is it? Yeah, I mean, this is, on the other hand, this is an opportunity for Liverpool to show the way in terms of how mass testing can help get this epidemic under control. There's a question for Andy about with this mass testing about what can be done to convince people to take it, because of course it's voluntary. People have to volunteer to go and get tested, and it might be once or twice a week, something like that. You're watching it closely from Manchester. What would be your answer to that question?
I think certainly well done, Liverpool, for landing it. I think it's we all feel it's the right thing to do, but it can't be seen as an alternative to the core of the contact tracing system. It has to knit into that, not live outside of that, if I could put it that way. And I just think there are big implications of obviously so many military personnel being in the region. And so we kind of feel there are definitely the right thing to do to look at it, but there are big questions around it as well as to, the compliance of the public's willingness to comply. I mean, the way that might be achieved, of course, is to sort of sell this as a way of getting out of restrictions. That if people do comply with the testing, that then it will be Liverpool's pathway out. So I think it's interesting, but it's got to knit with a localized contact tracing system rather than the sort of one we've got at the moment. And the difference for me is, absolutely agree with Emily. The difference here between centralized and localized in this context, if you think of contact tracing, the reality of the national Serco system is that where somebody gives their contacts, they tend to be all in the same house, and the national system rings them individually, the members of the family, because it can't see the join the dots, if you like. And that's just it's a difference between call centers and sort of people on doorsteps, isn't it? And if you have people on doorsteps having one conversation with the family and sorting out the self-isolation arrangements and the financial support for that will work, in my view.
Yeah,
a call center.
We really just need the buy-in of the local population, though. I can imagine if someone's coming around to your house saying, "Do you want a test?" It's like, well, if I have one and it's positive, then I have to self-isolate, and that has an economic implication for each family, doesn't it? So I really think we need to see the detail. In principle, I really agree with mass testing, especially of high-risk groups, healthcare workers, teachers, police, etc., children, and it just needs to be rolled out properly. And I'm really looking forward to what's going to happen in Liverpool.
Yeah, I mean, additionally,
Tom, I need to leave, I'm afraid. I better go because I'm getting messages that I need to be on the different call. I'm really sorry to do that to you.
We're going to let you go. We have a replacement for you, which is...
Oh, good.
Holly Ellis is going to join us just for the last few minutes of the podcast.
Well, Holly will talk a lot more sense than me, so it'll be more than a good replacement. So
Andy, thanks. There she is. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch up soon, Andy. All the best.
All the best, Tom. Bye, Emily.
Cheers.
Nice to see you,
for now.
Thanks.
Holly. Hi, Holly. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. People will remember Holly from the last podcast. She is a real Scouse scientist. She did her original degree in Oxford, if I remember correctly, and now is working as a biomedical scientist in genetics at the Women's Hospital. Now, last time Holly was with us, she's also a big campaigner for supporting women in science and getting girls into science. And last time she was with us, she pointed out that myself and Professor Sekou were the sort of archetypal scientists, rather old, rather grey, rather shabby, and rather male. So, Holly, what are your thoughts about our guest today?
Yeah, sorry about that, Tom. I didn't mean to offend you.
It's fine.
But no, I was really interested listening to the conversation today. And I think, I really admire everything Andy Burnham's done, because I can kind of relate to him in a way in trying to, support the Northwest and support the North, because it definitely does seem that throughout this pandemic, no one really cares until London's affected, and then suddenly everything's got to change then to suit them. So I think Andy's done a really great job of championing the North, and that's something that I like to do in my work as well.
Well, thank you for that. I must admit, what I was wondering about was what you made of our female senior scientist, Emily Adams, and the work she does at the School of Tropical Medicine on diagnostics.
Yeah, amazing work. But I don't know that much about what exactly it is that you're doing. So have you been involved at all in all of the diagnostic tests so far, or just the new ones that are coming in?
No, so we've been working on COVID-19 testing. I've got one in front of me, actually. I mean, Boris Johnson did announce their use, but a different company. So this is the sort of pregnancy style test that he's talking about. And I actually did one on myself. Was more than 3 weeks ago now? We got COVID, and I did a sort of throat nasal swab myself, put it on here, and it came up positive. And my God, I was shocked at how quickly that happened, and therefore how quickly we were able to self-isolate. So I really believe in them, because the swab and a PCR test, there's quite a delay, because you sort of think, well, I've got COVID, I've got symptoms, I don't feel that well, are they COVID, should I get a test? And you book a test, then you go, then the test gets sent away, and it's the whole thing takes almost a week really. So this took minutes. So I really believe in them. The ones that have been rolled out are not ones that we have worked on personally. Our data feeds into the international system. We're working with FIND, and that's a multi-center international study. And FIND, the Foundation for Innovative New Diagnostics, compile that information and send it to WHO, who make a recommendation. And so part of our work went towards the mass procurement of the Abbott and the SD biosensor a few weeks ago. So very proud of it. The ones being implemented are not ones we've worked on, and I hope that. But
it is the same. But that you've just given us, you've given a great advert for that's the lateral flow test.
Yeah.
And it's a quick result and very helpful to know. And that type of test is being introduced through the mass testing in Liverpool, isn't it? Which is why we want people to get involved in this mass testing program.
Yeah, they're just so easy to use, and the results are just so rapid. And they will be very specific as well, so we won't get a lot of false positives, which people have been talking about in the news, having a positive result, which means someone has to self-isolate when they're not actually infected. That's much less likely on this type of a test.
Could you see, this is not part of the mass testing screen, so I'm just, thinking into the future, but could you see a kind of situation where there's a box of those tests outside a nightclub, let's say, and Holly as our young representative young person, would young people be willing, they want to go into a nightclub or a pub, and they're told, fine, you just do the test and do that right now, and if it's negative you can come in. Can we see that? Would we see that kind of approach, do you think? Or maybe schools testing school kids on the way in once a week? Do you think that'd be acceptable, Holly, that kind of approach?
Sorry, I thought you were asking it, Emily. Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's a great idea, and I think certainly I would be up for it. But I've seen a lot of skepticism on over Facebook and stuff like this, and people who don't quite understand perhaps how the testing actually works, and they're worried about, are you going to have my DNA, and what else are you going to test me for, and what else is they kind of don't understand perhaps how the test works, and that we're only testing for one particular thing. So I think a lot of people, and you know, rightly so, if you don't understand it, then of course you're going to be a bit anxious about going ahead with the testing. And I think that's going to be one of the major challenges with this testing in Liverpool, actually getting people on board with it.
Yeah, I agree. And we've seen that. We've run TB studies all across Africa. And unless you get sort of local involvement, and then the studies will never work. You know, you really need to speak to local community leaders to really, incentivize people to come and be tested. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area. I totally agree. And, you know, when you take it, you'll really sort of then become quite vulnerable. You have to think about who you were in touch with in the last couple of days, and then you have to tell them. And you know, it's a really difficult thing to do. So I think there are lots of details that need to be ironed out. But in principle, I think it's the way forward.
Should we be proud of the fact that this is being trialled in Liverpool, that we're leading the way for the country?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, me too. I think so. Definitely, it makes a change that we're actually, you know, the first to have something. So I think it's a really good opportunity for the city.
Great. It's also a very good example of the city, the council, the NHS, and the University's School of Tropical Medicine all working together. We have reached our 45-minute mark, and the guidance on podcasts is to stop at 45 minutes. So I must thank, I mean, we usually just finish off on I'm just having a quick look at the comments, of which there are many, just to see if there's anything that, you know, we should definitely pick up on. Somebody's mentioned about testing is good, but you've got to have financial support if you're then isolating because you're positive. I've posted, by the way, I should let everyone know, the links there for the podcast to catch up on the podcast, and also the Facebook link. There's quite a few comments relating to the stuff Andy was talking about as well. I think we should, lots of votes for Andy Burnham as King of the North, although there's a few for Klopp as well. So we may have to leave that one for a future discussion. But anyway, let's stop there. I'm going to just do the thanks. First of all, as mentioned, we want you as our listeners, follow those links that I've just posted. I'll post them again. Go onto the podcasts and listen to the old podcasts. And also, whilst you're there, please rate, review, and follow. We need more of you to do that. And we need you to do that so we know that you love it. Also, go onto the Facebook page. It's Scouse Science Poddy, and if you follow us there, you'll keep in touch with our future events. Our next podcast is on the 4th of December. We have Eleanor Moritz from BBC Northwest Tonight. You'll all know her from there, and Mike Beadsworth from the Royal Liverpool University Hospital over the road. I want to thank the IT team, particularly Chris, who's helped with this one, and Claire. I want to thank our guests for joining us. Finally, as a special request, my Auntie Judy is 80 today. Would you guys join me in wishing her a happy birthday, please?
Oh, happy birthday.
We have
Brilliant.
to sing. Or...
No, we don't have to sing unless would you like to?
No.
I did wonder about it, but I wasn't sure if I'd be able to convince Andy Burnham to sing. She usually, whenever I think the first time was when I had my inaugural and I was made a professor, and then pretty well every time I appear on TV or radio, she sends a message saying, "To think I used to change your nappies." So that's what you get with 8-year-old aunties. Anyway, thanks very much to you, our guests, for joining. Thanks to the audience for listening and for sending in some great questions. We will see you on the 4th of December. That's everything for now. Goodbye.
Bye.